Welcome, world, to another episode of Nobody's a Nobody podcast with me, Mike McVeigh. This is the podcast where I interview people I find absolutely fascinating, and I believe you will too if you give them a chance. This week, our guest is my former roommate, John Loghry, also known as Dr. John, and Jarvix's Hot Dog Song of the Week is featuring Party People by Stepmom. Now, for my shout-out business of the week, I'm going to actually have our guest, Dr. John, tell us about his favorite pizza place.
My favorite place is the place you introduced me to in college. You remember Papa Angelo's?
And where's Papa Angelo's located?
Used to be on a side street in Bethany, and now it's actually on Route 66. It's on the main drag, and it is as good as ever. I've had a lot of pizza in my life, and I usually toss the crust because you don't want it. I don't know what they do to the crust, but it's good.
You heard it from Dr. John himself. Try Papa Angelo's Pizza out in Bethany, Oklahoma. Our nonprofit is still Our Neighborhood Empowered, 1okc.org, and they help teenagers and children develop the skills they need to have a true chance at making it in the world today. It's been a pretty exciting day today. I just got finished with a cross-podcast interview. I'll be interviewing my friend Dan Wade on this podcast, and he's interviewing me for something that will be coming out in the early January. It's pretty exciting. It's my first time to be a podcast interviewee, so hopefully I don't do too bad of a job. I've gotten lots of good practice with my guests here. And I just want to remind you, I have my 42nd birthday party coming up. Please check it out. More information is on the Facebook page. And enjoy this episode, please share it with a friend or share it with an enemy. Actually, just share it with anybody and everybody. It's always great for me that way. All right, so let me give a little bit of context. I've kind of gone back and forth on how much I want to share, but John and I go back since fall of 97 when we first started SNU together as freshmen. We became roommates in our sophomore year, and we took about 15-year absence before we saw each other again. And we weren't really very good friends at that point. It took some time, and there's been a lot of life changes, and we talk about some of those today. But John is someone I care for very deeply. He has been a huge inspiration in my life. He's helped challenge some things. I don't always agree with some of the conclusions he's come to, but I don't think we should base our friends purely on what's good or bad. Now, this is a more talky episode, or where we're friends going back and forth, so it might be a little bit different than our standard, but please enjoy this episode with Dr. John. No, you've always been a guy that I found very inspirational, regardless of your lack of gossip. I don't know if you remember this at all, but when we were roommates, you actually introduced me to Vivaldi when you had to listen to Vivaldi for fine arts. I think you had listened like 10 hours or 100 hours of Vivaldi. And
it was something like that. It was not good.
Of course, I only listened to about 24 hours of it, so I was not nearly as effective.
Right.
But
I think that was the time I realized that getting the right recording was the difference between liking a piece of music and hating it. I think that was the moment. Yeah. Anyway.
And it's forever scarred you since, correct?
A little bit, yeah. No, I do like Vivaldi.
Yeah, and I've bought like a whole album of Vivaldi. It was like his greatest hits.
Nice.
It's just the same song over and over. No.
It's just like a few measures of the Four Seasons over and over for like an hour. Excellent.
I mean, you're not wrong. So I know this will be probably one of the harder interviews for me because I know you a little bit better, especially up to a certain point. We were pretty close in time. And then for all the wonderful, my fives of people that listen to this podcast, what do you do for a living and what does that constitute?
Yeah, so I'm a child welfare specialist 4, which is a supervisor. I've been doing that this time around for about 9.5 years. What that constitutes is I have 6 people under me, and they're the people who are making direct contact with families. I'm in there too sometimes. In our in our unit, we get kids and families after they've been separated. So after a child has been removed, someone else has done the investigation, talked to the collaterals, identified safety threats, realized that there was no way to mitigate that safety threat in like a safety plan or something like that. And so the kids have been removed, and hopefully are in foster care with a relative. So then we take over the case, and our job is to guide these people through this system that we do 5 days a week, and it still takes us, a year to really get the ins and outs of it. Our job is to guide people through it successfully the first time, because they come in, they don't know what's going on. I mean, some of them have been foster children, or they've had a little bit of prior experience, but that's basically it. Trying to refocus people's lives and take care of those safety threats so we can send the kids home.
And since you said you have 6 employees under you, about how many cases does each employee have for your area?
Fully loaded caseload is not supposed to go over 15 children per caseload. Right now, I've got one person who just got out of training, so he's at a half caseload. He only has 8 children. The rest of my people are right around 14, 15, 16 kids. So what does that come to? Like 70 kids, 75 kids in my unit, something like that. One of the people under me is actually a case aide. So she essentially does a lot of paperwork, and then she does the long haul visits where she has to pick a kid up from Bartlesville, bring him back to Tulsa for a visit, take him back to Bartlesville, that kind of thing.
I don't think some people realize that part of the job is literally, it's not based on where the kid lives or is being put up in a home. It's where the whole system starts, right? That if it started
Yes.
Canadian County, then it doesn't matter that Tulsa is where you're driving to every day.
Yeah. Yeah, that is true. And we have kids as far away as Idabel and places like that,
Yeah, I remember when Brenda, of course, she only did child welfare for about a year before we moved out of Oklahoma. And then when we came back with OJA, she's driven across the state up until she got into her current position for similar reasons, not quite the same drama.
Yeah, once they come to us, they've already been removed, and then it's our turn to kind of try to deal with the courts, the service providers, the family, sometimes the extended family, try to bring a coalition together to kind of support people and get them put back together. Yeah.
One of the things that I've heard mostly in Oklahoma, though I heard this in Pennsylvania, I've heard it in a couple other states I've lived as well, that the system is only broken like with child welfare, and I don't think anybody would disagree that the system is broken, but the question is, why is it broken? And from your perspective, why is child welfare broken, or at least here in Oklahoma?
I'll say it's been more broken than it is now in Oklahoma. And why I think it's not so much anymore, there are still things that could have worked a lot better. Why it's not as broken as it was is because we were the first state to settle a lawsuit that was being brought, I believe, by former foster children against every state. I think they started by suing New York, and then they've just kind of slowly been suing every state. It was a good thing because part of that settlement meant that some co-neutrals were appointed who were going to come in and make sure that we were doing our best to make things better. It increased our funding significantly. And I think that was one of the big things. Our funding was just not there. That's increased significantly. When I was doing this work as a specialist, I had 42 children on average at any given time on my caseload. And that's 42 hours per month of just sitting in someone's home talking to a kid, plus all the other things that go along with that. Most of the people I know were drowning. Now, at this point, we do have a little bit more that we're expected to do. There's more paperwork that we're expected to do, more conversations that we're expected to have with parents and service providers. All in all, it's a very good thing. But we are at this point, we've been able, at least in my county, to keep the numbers down so that we do, in fact, only have people with around 15 kids per caseload. So that really increases their ability to really learn the job and be there for those parents when the parents need it. So,
would you say that your job and your girlfriend's job and the people you work with, that's stressful, or is it pretty much a piece of cake even now?
Piece of cake. Oh my God, it's stressful, and then I think, like some other populations, people who do other things, you kind of settle into this view of the world that really no one else shares. Like, you can't be at a party and tell the stories or joke about the things with normal people that you joke about back at the office. You settle into that kind of black humor. It's called dark humor, because of the things that we see, every day or at least once a month, and the things we see over and over again. Um, I used to say I learned something new and surprising about my job every week, and this was for the first maybe 3 years. Every week, I was encountering some situation that I had never encountered before that kind of tweaked my view of child welfare and what it is that we did. So at this point, I have I think we both have a really negative opinion of the human race as a whole. Yeah, I would say it comes with its own stress. After a while, it kind of fades into the background and just becomes part of your normal life. Now, with my job, it's a little bit more of a slow burn stress. With investigations, she gets a referral, and if the referral comes in as priority one, she has to go out and make contact by midnight that same day. And so she's going out and trying to figure out, if I leave this child here, is this child going to get seriously injured overnight, or are we good? So with me, it's just, can I convince the court to send this kid home based on what this parent is doing right now? And is that the right thing to do? It's a little, you have more time to stretch it out and think about it. But yeah, it's a pretty stressful position. I never wanted it, to be honest. I got into it because there was nothing else for me here. Once we got back to Oklahoma, I just couldn't get hired anywhere else. So yeah, it's a mixed bag over here. I've had times where someone having an attorney was disastrous to a case. Sometimes for the children, not for the parent. Parent got what they wanted. It wasn't gonna be good for the children. But I had one case. This lady had an attorney, and when I was given the case, it was an immediate termination just because of the severity of the breaks in the child's 4-month-old femur. And so I put it on the back burner because I had 41 other children on my caseload, and so I wasn't giving this lady a lot of time. And at one point, her lawyer yelled at me, and he was like, "There's no reason that she, shouldn't be back with a kid or shouldn't be working to get back with her kid." And I thought about it, and I was like, you know what? Actually, I think he's correct. So I went to the DA and said, you know what? The guy that broke the femur, I definitely think, broke 2 of them. I definitely think we should go for termination on him. But actually, what I'm seeing from this lady, I think we might be able to get her where she needs to be. So the DA agreed to kind of hold off on termination for a while. I started working with her in earnest. And then, she ended up, it was a success story. So for me, sending kids home is a success story because,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So it's kind of hit or miss over here in terms of attorneys. I tell people, I don't know, I'm never going to tell people not to have an attorney, but when we're working with people, if you're doing what you really need to be doing, then you're not going to need one, because my worker and I am going to be your biggest advocate. And I've had situations where I had to argue in court with the DA, with the child's attorney, and with other attorneys about why this parent had actually gotten it around, turned it around. But anyway, yeah, it's hard to know whether to have one or not when you've never been through the system,
Right. And it's not really a dream that most people have, is like, man, I want to get through the system so I can know what it's like.
Right.
Not that we're not going to stay on child welfare the whole evening, I promise. Just for
Okay.
another 4 hours.
Right.
But I do remember a few years ago when we were going to Blue Note and to some other places and stuff, that your work really weighed you down. And so it was a nice escape to be able to go out and watch bands play and just be out doing anything else other than your job. How do you deal with the stress now? How does your girlfriend deal with the stress? Is it obviously now that, let's go before COVID and then let's talk about after COVID or during COVID.
So one of the ways she deals with it is by watching MSNBC constantly. So she knows that there are other like-minded people out there who are forward thinking. That's something that drives me absolutely crazy. I cannot stand having the TV in the house, honestly. Before she moved in, I didn't have a TV in my house. Once I moved out on my own, it was just me and the 3 kids every other week, no television. So how I de-stress is read books. I do some projects in the garage. Like I made some shelves over here out of a couple of broken wooden beams I found in my attic. Or I write. I'm still working on the writing. So pretty much all day today, I've either been reading or working on this young adult novel that I've been working on for maybe about 9 months now.
You want to talk about the young adult novel at all?
Work is how I relax.
Sorry, say that part about work again. It cut out.
Work is how I relax, in other words. So.
That makes sense. Mentally, it makes sense. So can you talk about your young adult novel at all, or is that something you're going to wait till you're closer to completion?
Oh, sure. I'll talk about it. And I've been thinking about this recently. I started writing my first kind of novel novella when I was around 12 years old. And I think it was pretty good. And then I developed this anxiety disorder. Don't know if you noticed how anxious / occasionally depressed / kind of an asshole I was in college. Yeah, I know.
To be fair, though, I was your roommate for part of that time, and I definitely fit in the obnoxious category, so I might not have noticed everything you did.
And I did not understand like social cues or how to interact with people. You're like, oh, really? Huh, weird. I see it on your face. Oh God, yeah. I look back on my behavior in those earlier days, and I'm just like, Jesus Christ. Yeah, well, I'm lucky I'm not dead at this point.
Sorry, you're writing.
Yes. So I finally got back into it a few years ago. So this is probably the 9th or 10th novel I've written. I think I'm pretty good at it this time. I think this one's better than anything I've written before. So I'm very happy with it, and I'm hoping to find a publisher, of this one. I've been able to publish a few things, short stories, and a few things. But yeah, this one is about orphans on the moon. And deals with issues of fascism and finding your place in the world, when you find yourself suddenly without a place. If that makes any sense.
Not yet, but when I read it, I'm sure it will. Well, once you get that published, you should definitely let me know, and we'll promote it on the podcast, so you'll have at least 2 more buyers. Me and
Excellent.
Who I buy it for. So
excellent. I'll practice, so I'm better able to speak about it by then. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I have noticed that you do seem a lot less anxious now than even a couple years ago when we last really talked, and you seem a lot more confident. Maybe it's the beard. I'm not sure, but you do seem a lot more laid back and in a better place. And so I'm glad for you on that.
Yeah, I feel like I'm happy for the first time in my life, honestly.
Well, I remember I don't know if it was this year or last year, but you posted something about, I wish I would have known that I didn't have to have felt this pain or this anxiety.
I think I said that about medications. And it's, I was just like, sometimes you take a medication and it's just not right for you. It doesn't work out. And you're just like, I don't know if meds are right for me. Yeah, that's right. I forgot. And then you take a medication and you're just like, this is how people feel, like without trying. This is what other people have been bringing to the table for 40 years. And then I went into a litany of curses, I believe, because I felt so strongly about it.
Yeah. And I'm kind of curious about that, if you're willing to talk about it some, as you travel around your house.
Yeah, got to refill my wine.
When did you get to the point of where you knew that, or the doctor knew that you needed to switch medications, as opposed to, you should just continue doing it without medication or the current medication?
It was my first individual therapist who recommended that I go see a psychiatrist. And thinking back on those sessions, I'm just like, oh my God, he earned every bit of the money that I gave him. Like if I was a patient, doing, like, if I had a patient like that, I'd just be like, Jesus, get out of here. I'm just done. But yeah, he recommended I go see a psychiatrist for an eval. Wellbutrin is what I ended up being on. And what I found was my writing took off. And this is one of the reasons I look back on my life and I have such mixed feelings about it, because I realized how much anxiety I was carrying with me and how much it literally just crippled me, you know. Because before I was on that, I'd go down to the local coffee shop. I'd start writing. I'd get 2 lines in. I'd be worried that I wasn't doing it well enough. I'd get up. I'd smoke a cigarette. I was a smoker then. Sit down, put another 2 lines down, get up, smoke another cigarette, go get more coffee, something like that. And when I got on Wellbutrin, it was enough to just kind of take the edge off that anxiety, so that I was able to just sit down and just write. And so for a while, I was working at a psych hospital in Pasadena. Best job I ever had, by the way. I was interviewing people who were coming in for suicidal ideation, homicidal ideation sometimes. I had to call a doctor in the middle of the night one night and be like, hey, yeah, this dude, he really wants to kill you. And the guy actually answered his phone. He was like, oh my goodness, I don't even remember this guy. And I'm just like, yeah, it's the spinal fusion kind of messed him up. But I was working the 3:30 p.m. to 11:30 p.m. shift, night shift, which I really enjoyed. So on the medication, I was dropping my kid off at daycare around 7 a.m. I was making it over to a local coffee shop at 7:30, and then I would literally sit until about 2:30, maybe if I was pushing at 2:45. The only time I would get up is to go refill my coffee or, pee, because, all I'm drinking is coffee. And I'd be able to sit there and just write the entire time. So that was the first moment I realized, a medication that fixes a deficit that you didn't really realize you had, just makes a tremendous difference. And so this last time, I was actually in Ireland. My girlfriend got me to take 2 weeks off and go to Ireland. Right in the middle of it, I developed shingles. As a 39-year-old man, got shingles. Yeah, I started having these sores on my back, stretching all the way around to one side on the front. It's one of the reasons I learned that Irish healthcare is so much better than American healthcare. I'm going to say that right now. Yeah, it was so easy to go into the doctor and go get the medication and pay $5 for something that would have cost $500 over here. Anyway, I'm on a tangent, but it was there was a kind of a nerve blocking agent that I still take for the nerve pain that still comes with that condition, even though it's healed. It's been healed for a year and a half. It wasn't until I was able to take that medication that I was able to really exercise without feeling physically ill immediately afterward. I realized after a while I've had a vitamin D deficiency throughout my life. And I think I've had some other problems where, just physical activity, exertion really messed my system up. Not in a good way. There's a reason that I'd work out and I would gain no muscle at all. So I think that post was right around the time I had started taking that medication to help with the nerve pain and realized, wow, I'm able to actually sit down and exercise for an hour at this point and not feel physically ill.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yep.
And taking these different medications for the various things, did you ever feel like before you took the medication that if you took that, it was going to take away your creativity or your the things that make you unique? And
oh yeah, and I was raised in the evangelical church, so I come from that background where they don't necessarily trust. They think it's a crutch. They think you shouldn't use it. I've come to the point in my life where obviously I've rejected evangelical Christianity and pretty much all religion, but also a lot of the things that just kind of filtered in and came with that. This being one of them. Yeah. So yeah, I had a lot of mixed feelings and misgivings. But at this point, I recommend medication to a lot of people who I identify with what they're going through, and I see my former self in them.
And I know creativity for you is one of the things that I've always had a admiration. I don't know if I would ever call it jealousy or envy, but just great admiration because I still remember things that you wrote back. Oh goodness, I can't believe it's been that long ago, 22, 23 years ago.
Right.
It's a simple tune, but it goes from G, D, G, D, C, where it's, I have no life, I have no wife. And I still come back to that tune more times than anything else, just
Nice.
whenever I'm messing around. And I still think about and I know you said you forgot it the last time I mentioned it to you, but the summer, as freshmen, we weren't roommates, but we decided to be roommates for the first semester sophomore year. And during that summer, we went to go visit each other's house. And, I came to your house in Duncan, and your mom and aunt were out there going like, whoa, hoochie mamas.
Oh my
and,
God.
which makes everything else about your background even more confusing, to say the least.
I am.
But then when you came over to our house, my dad was roofing the house for the purpose of selling so they could move to Texas. And we went to a thrift store, and you bought this hat that had like a leopard print that around it, and then it was like a Genghis Khan type thing.
Oh my God.
And I don't think we found anything for me, but we were at the corner of Northwest Expressway and 63rd, going towards Larson's from the south, and you're like, oh, what I like to do is because of the way people are driving, I like to pretend like they're coming at me like, like this. And that's also around the time when you said like, I think I'm going to start going by the name Vladimir Pavlov, but my friends call me Vlad.
Is that when that happened?
That's when you told me about it. I don't know when it started, but that's when you told me about it. I generally only have fond memories of you.
Surprising, because I don't feel like I was a great person back then, but I'm glad.
Well, I do remember when I came back to Oklahoma and I saw you. I think it was at Half Price Books over there near Ted's. And you're like, oh crap. I was like, man, I definitely was not the person I should have been back then. Otherwise, maybe it wouldn't have been as awkward of a thing. But
yeah, and I wasn't either. I mean, yeah, and I've been thinking a lot about this. I think one of the reasons I don't like necessarily looking back on my life is that it took me so long not to be the person I was raised to be. Yeah, and I don't like thinking about. Anyway, I think this is a sign of progress, honestly. I think I feel like I've made a lot of progress, but yeah, I have real mixed feelings about the past, in a variety of capacities.
Well, I remember even 22 years ago, we were talking about your love for art and your love for being able to create and use different mediums, which you still do, which I think is amazing. You draw, you do little, I don't know what to call them. Is sculpture the right word? Music, writing, poetry, art, different styles of art too, not just one. And I remember you talking specifically about how you were pretty much told if you wanted your education paid for, you had to have a real degree. And that was, 1998. So I can't even imagine all the different stuff you've dealt with through that journey. I mean, now you have a PhD in psychology.
Which I'm not using. Yeah, I think what I said back then was I'm majoring in psychology so I can go home for Christmas. And I was only half joking, but yeah, I've had a lot of discouragement from my parents, from my father in particular. One of my therapists was finally like, stop showing your father your novels. Like, don't let him read another one, because he completely discounted everything that I did. It's one of the reasons I think that I haven't pushed harder to get published in the past, and one of the reasons I'm such a perfectionist. I mean, many of us are, in terms of what I'm ready to go ahead and submit and get out into the world, because I anticipate the criticism. Honestly, I think it's one of the things that makes me a good witness for the DA in termination trials, because I will look back on my casework and be like, you know what, I could have done that better here, and I could have done that. Yeah, I could have done that better here, and I could have done that better there. I don't think any of it would have had a significant effect on the outcome, but if this attorney's really going to hammer me, then this is how I'm going to respond, and it's going to be my honest assessment of the situation. But yeah, that's one of the reasons I'm sure a lot of artists are really shy about giving their work out, because they anticipate that criticism. Because honestly, I feel like I was hobbled before I got out of the nest. I sprung from the nest, um, whether they meant to or not. I think that's a big part of what my parents did. In my teen years, especially.
The idea of a son trying to live up to his father's expectations. And I honestly don't have a whole lot of that in my own life. So yay. But at the same time, I see this come up in so many stories about that. And what can you explain that a little bit more, maybe from your perspective of what it's like trying to live into somebody else's expectations?
While also knowing that you will never do that. Yeah. Yeah, it's that unattainable prize where that, I mean, you're gonna spend your entire life trying to get there with and knowing that you're not going to get there. It was never a question for me that I was going to get a PhD because my dad had, and I thought, well, you can only go up from what your parents have done. You can't not get a PhD if he did. So I did end up getting 2 master's degrees and a PhD, which I'm not using. I owed a ton of student loans, of course, because we live in America, and I'm not smart with my money, right? It's kind of a nightmare over here at this point. you know, One catastrophic medical illness away from homelessness, as are we all. So I remember literally everything that I'd mentioned to my dad that I thought I might want to be. Like at one point, I was like, you know what, I think I might want to be a teacher. His response was, yeah, those who can do and those who can't teach. And every other thing that I said that wasn't hard science, it was always going to have to be physics or chemistry with him because everything else is just kind of BS. So I think that's one of the reasons I kind of knocked around. It is one of the reasons I am who I am today. Um, I think the silver lining of having that issues like that, is that it leads you to a lot of introspection. And so, as I said, it took me a long time, but to not be who I was raised to be. But I'm in a much better place at this point. I feel like I've come to terms with a lot of things, including my historical privilege. As a white male, I'm coming to terms with the guilt of not being super successful, even though I've had all that privilege as a white male, um, a white cis heterosexual male. But yeah, it's been rough, but it's rough for everyone out there these days. I think. Well, I can't say that. I was gonna say I think part of rejecting Christianity is part of rejecting this whole thing, but that's actually something else that just completely stopped making sense to me.
To give a little bit of background, like some of the other guests on here, you and I grew up in the same denomination.
Mhm.
Well, you did more so than me. My family kind of bounced around a little bit before we landed back where we started. But we both went to Southern Nazarene University, and you grew up in the Nazarene Church, which um, is it's a whole different weird thing. But theologically, not really as much center as practice has. Put more of a right of center or kind of a fundamental evangelical kind of background, especially in the part of the country where you grew up in
You
Duncan,
think?
Oklahoma. So, um, when did you, or did you always, when did you kind of start making choices that Christianity, or at least the way that you're raised, was no longer going to be part of who you would be?
So I think there was always a part of me. Now the major part of me, the bigger part of me, took it way more seriously than I should have, and so I was always on track to be a zealot. I took it more seriously than any other kid I knew. Because they had more of the typical, yeah, we're going to go to church, but we're also going to be people kind of thing. And I was like, yeah, if we believe this, then we have to act this other way. Like we have to do this all the time. And that's probably where a lot of my anxiety came from, because I could never live up to that standard either. But there were some things, growing up that started kind of poking holes in it. One was the first time I heard about evolution was in children's church, which was kind of the thing after Sunday school in our church. Yeah, so this lady told us, yeah, some people, scientists, they think we came from monkeys, but we didn't. And I thought about it and I was just like, it makes sense. Like, this makes so much sense. So after church, I was like, Mom, Dad, have you heard about evolution? Like, it's wonderful. Like, it just makes sense. I'm sure they were not happy. Yeah, so first time I heard about evolution, I was just like, yeah, that's what happened. I get it now. A few years later, when I developed that anxiety disorder, I retreated into fundamentalism. So I stopped believing in evolution, not because it stopped making sense, but because, I was going to be loyal to the cause. And this is what Christians do. We don't believe in evolution. We believe in creation. So I actually went to a paleontology camp over at OSU, I think between my sophomore and junior year, to actually dig up fossils and study the fossil record. And I was a creationist the whole time.
So you were actually you were a creationist.
I was, yeah, as a teenager.
Okay. I didn't know. I actually didn't know that about you.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, a real fundamental. And then when I got older, I was just like, evolution happened. It totally happened. That's one of the weaknesses I think of teaching kids that kind of BS is that when you grow out of it, why not just grow out of the rest of it too? And I'd had thoughts as a kid. I remember being on the playground at my elementary school thinking, I feel like I've got a better moral center than God does. Because, my Sunday school teachers are like, all those people who have never heard about Jesus going straight to hell. And I was just like, that's not fair. That's not fair at all. Because I don't know if I was talking about prevenient grace when I was a college student, but I think when I was in grad school at Fuller Seminary, I was all about prevenient grace, which was one theory about how people who had never heard of Jesus would get to go to heaven anyway. And then I remember in college, at some point, I think I was studying psychology, so some theorist had referred to God as like an imaginary friend for adults. For a reason I didn't get, I was gleeful about that. I was just like, oh, that's so awesome. And I think it's because there was this part of me that was ready to be free of all that. I was just not letting myself, get there. So right out of college, I read a book called Honest to God by, I believe, an Anglican bishop, Bishop Robinson from England. And he said a few things like, this is the official doctrine of the church, and I don't think it's correct. I mean, I honestly think this other thing is true. And I credit him with giving me permission to feel like I could stray away from the doctrine and be okay about that. And so it was a few years later, I'd been thinking through what is the structure of the psyche, what is humanity's place in the world, in the cosmos. And one day I realized, like, in all my theorizing, in everything I'm thinking, like, there's no need to like throw God in there because you can't explain it anymore. And that's when I was just like, it's not there. I think I started drinking heavily in grad school. By that time, there were a lot of things that hadn't gone right in my life. Spending 11 months working child welfare straight out of college was one of those things. And then there were some things personally, in my marriage, kind of right out of the gate, our marriage did not work out the way that we thought it was going to, in a variety of ways. So, got to grad school, started doing some heavy drinking.
So I know California didn't sound like it was the greatest thing in the world, but I know you always talk very, or at least in the past, you've always talked very very highly about California. And then you came back to Oklahoma. Why?
Yeah. I asked myself that same question because here's the thing. When I was in California at the end, I was in the best job I had ever worked. Working at the psych hospital, it was stressful. I was dealing with people who sometimes were actively suicidal with a plan. And if I left them alone in a room to go get a nurse to 5150 them, they might actually jump out the window and go find a way to kill themselves. But it was a fascinating, an ever-changing job, and I loved it. And I remember thinking, I'm finally plugged in now. Like I'm finally part of society in a way that makes sense to me, and I will never not be plugged in again. Like I'm never gonna leave this job unless I've got something better to go to. And so I really thought I'm set for life. I'm gonna be employed for life. And then my wife at the time really wanted to take advantage of that first home buyers thing. That was a thing back in those Obama years, but we couldn't afford anything in California, obviously. And I said, no, I'm not going back to that place. And so a year later, she started on me again. She wanted to go back. She wanted to raise our kid near family, specifically my family, because at the time we thought my family was better, a little more manageable. And I guess there were some things going on at that hospital that I didn't agree with. I wasn't really comfortable with. I actually went to the compliance officer at the hospital at one point, and I was like, "Hey, I'm pretty sure we're breaking state law by doing this thing that you're making us do like every day." And he was like, "Yeah, we are, but we're going to become profitable, so I need you to keep doing that." And I didn't feel real great about that. That said, I loved that job. I love that hospital. But I let her convince me that, yes, we should go ahead and come back to Oklahoma, the land where dreams go to die, so that we could take advantage of that program. And I really thought, here's the thing, my ex, as much as we don't get along, she was really good at what she did. She had been groomed to take a leadership job at Monrovia High School for several years. And then there were some leadership positions coming available. And then that was the time of the Great Recession. So there were all kinds of other people vying for every job. She didn't get the job that essentially had been promised to her. And so she was angry about that. And I was like, okay, fine, we'll go back to Oklahoma. And I literally thought, two people who are really good at what they do are going to have no problem finding employment. And I was mistaken. I was not smart. I probably should have let her come back, and I should have just stayed there, but didn't work out. So yeah, we came back, and I worked on my dissertation for a while exclusively, did a little bit of writing, went off my meds at the time, my psych meds, because I couldn't afford them. That didn't work out very well. And anyway, finally got back into child welfare, and we end up here.
One of the things that, if I did have any jealousy for you, that's not just admiration, was in that semester we were roommates together.
Mm-hmm.
Never picked up a guitar before, other than maybe just to hold for somebody else. But you started taking guitar lessons that semester. And I'd at that time been playing for 3 or 4 years, and you quickly surpassed me.
You think?
I know. And what was worse is your guitar teacher was actually the guitar teacher I had for that 3 or 4 years. Your love for music as a whole has always been foundational for me. And I've never been the creative one. I've always been like, hey, John did this really cool thing. Or should I say Vlad did this really cool thing. And I try to take what you do, and then I might change it up a little bit, but it's not creating something necessarily new. It's always taking something and maybe moving it forward if I'm lucky.
I think so. You wrote a bunch of songs, right?
Yeah. I found out they're all Beatles songs.
No, they weren't. Yeah.
I did write a song once though. And I was so proud of it. And I showed my parents, and my mom started singing at the chorus part, 8 days a week.
Oh my God.
And I didn't even realize I'd completely ripped off the Beatles because she made me listen to them so much that I hated them at the time.
That happened. You remember the song that we played at the outdoor festival in the parking lot of that church?
Yes.
While the wedding was going on inside the church. And I absolutely know they were saying their vows, and they were hearing voices saying, Jesus, you're so wonderful.
Well, we're going to have a wedding at the church. You might as well hear about how wonderful Jesus is, right?
Right. They booked the 2 events at once. It was like a carnival outside for kids and a wedding inside. You know what? That's on them, dude.
Oh, it was.
You harmonized pretty well on that song, though.
You were also the one that introduced me to Jarvix.
Who is an amazing artist, right?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Who is an amazing artist, right?
He is.
He has not gotten the appreciation, the attention that he has deserved.
Hot dog. Hot dog. Hot dog. Hot dog. Hot dog.
Hey listeners, it's Jarvix again with my Hot Dog Song of the Week. This episode I'm bringing you a single from a band called Stepmom off of their new self-titled debut full-length album. The song is called Party People but as you'll hear, this is decidedly not a party anthem. Stepmom is, as they've deftly put it, an orchestral dream punk band. Orchestral because there are string players, dream because there are some dream pop influences, and punk because there are rock undercurrents that play into the group's occasional antisocial themes. For introverts, this combination of sounds makes a lot of sense, especially when capturing an internal drama that is quite minimal on the surface. I wrote a band bio for Stepmom earlier this year for an Oklahoma Film and Music Office artist feature, and here are some of the things I said there. Meditating on the plight of the human spirit striving to thrive in a world of systematic pervasiveness, lead singer and guitarist Lindsay Cox and her bandmates weave deeply conscious and subconscious themes into dreamy three-part harmonies, ambient cello, and synth contrasted with angsty guitar riffs and powerful lead vocals. As a core member of acclaimed, currently on hiatus Oklahoma City rock band, the So Help Me's, Cox pulls from her experience in that group as well as newfound influences at Factory Obscura to spin Stepmom's philosophical contemplations into both concrete and intangible art. The project's multimedia palette of expression is as arresting as its growing musical repertoire. That last part there refers in part to their live shows, which often feature stage dressing made to look like a pink bedroom, which I interpret as a sort of refuge from the outer social world. Songs like Party People reinforce that idea. It's a relationship on the rocks song at its heart, but it expresses its loneliness through a striking lens, namely a room full of people who feel obligated to stay at a party that they don't really want to be at. It's also just a fabulous song with layers and twists that make for an eventful listen. If you like this, be sure to check out the full LP, which you can pick up at stepmomband.bandcamp.com or stream on the usual services. It's also available, believe it or not, on audio cassette tape. More on that in an upcoming podcast minisode. Here is Party People by Stepmom.
Am I alone? I had to cry it
Thank you to Dr. John Loghry for being my guest. Thank you to Stepmom and Jarvix for recommending them. Try out Papa Angelo's in Bethany. Also, support 1okcorg.org. It has been a pleasure to serve you this week. I look forward to the rest of December. I hope you are as well. And no matter what, take care of yourself. Don't hurt yourself. Make the world a better place. Nobody is a nobody, and that means you. Until next time.